Have you heard the news? On March 1st, 2024, the U.S. District Court for Northern Alabama ruled that the Corporate Transparency Act is unconstitutional. We're free. We're free. The Wicked Witch is dead. Not so fast. Not so fast at all. I'm sorry. This has gotten a lot of press. There has been a ton of misunderstandings. Many people think that we're free. We don't have to worry about complying with this anymore. Oh my gosh, I'm telling you right now, what would you do without me? Because I'm going to set you straight about exactly what it is that's going on and why we're still in grave danger from this horrible law. So in this video, I'm going to tell you exactly what the lawsuit was, what the decision was, and most importantly, why we're still obligated to comply with the Corporate Transparency Act. And I'm going to walk you through a scenario that even if it gets to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court rules it's unconstitutional, you're still going to need to be protected from all the stuff that's happening with suspicious activity reports and accounts being closed and frozen. You won't be out of danger from that anyway. So that's going to be there no matter what. Okay. So who am I? A lot of you know me, but for those of you who don't, my name is Don Thornton. I have been a very successful, one of the most successful real estate investors in short sales for this is my 22nd year. I have an MBA in finance. I've been a serial entrepreneur. I've had my own small business since high school. In fact, I turned down a full ride baseball scholarship when I graduated in 82 because I wanted to start my own business. That's really where my passion was. Now, before we get into the nitty gritty of this, I am required by law, so I don't get my little butt in trouble, and tell you that I am not a licensed tax, legal, or accounting advisor. Nothing I say here should be considered tax, legal, or accounting advice. You should always get advice from a licensed tax, legal, or a tax advisor before you enter into any transaction. Okay, this is for informational and entertainment purposes only. Okay, let's start talking about what the heck is going on with this lawsuit. Well, it was brought in was it November 22nd of 2022, so quite a while ago. And the plaintiffs is the National Small Business Association and one guy named Isaac Winkles, who's a member of that. So they're the plaintiffs. They brought the lawsuit against Janet Yellen, who is in charge of the Treasury Department of the U.S. Like I said, they filed it on November 22nd, 2022. The lawsuit alleges that the Corporate Transparency Act's disclosure requirements exceed Congress's authority under Article 1 of the Constitution and violate our First, Fourth, Ninth, and 10th Amendments. Now, of course, the government's just not going to take that lying down. They came back and said that the Corporate Transparency Act is authorized under the Foreign Affairs Power, the Commerce Clause, and Congress's taxing powers in general. Well, we didn't have to wait too long. I think, frankly, less than 2 years was pretty quick when it comes to that. But the court ruled that that this is unconstitutional because it is not authorized under Congress's foreign affairs powers. That incorporation is a purely domestic task, and that the power is given to the states for that. That's not a federal thing. They also ruled that the CTA is not authorized under the Commerce Clause because it does not regulate the law, does not regulate channels and instrumentalities of commerce. Incorporation is a non-commercial activity. And the fact that many incorporated entities engage in interstate commerce does not mean that everyone does, and therefore it's too piecemeal and it's not sufficient to invoke the Commerce Clause. It also ruled that the Corporate Transparency Act is not necessary because there are already similar requirements under FinCEN's customer due diligence rule, which requires banks to collect beneficial ownership information already. And it determined that the Corporate Transparency Act is not authorized under Congress's taxing powers because even though the government having all that beneficial ownership access would be useful in helping them better, more efficiently collect taxes, it's not sufficient to invoke their tax powers. So, all in all, that's a dream scenario for those of us who hate this law and have always thought that it's unconstitutional. But we still have a system of laws and courts, and ultimately it's the judges, and it'll eventually get to the Supreme Court, and they're going to decide whether this is constitutional or not. So let's talk now about why we're not out of the woods yet. And as I mentioned in my introduction of this video, I told you that, as usual, the mainstream media has got it wrong. I mean, you could go in and Google everything, and oh my gosh, these people are saying, okay, great, it's unconstitutional. Guys, I'm pretty active on social media and YouTube, as you know. I've got a pretty good following. I got 36,000 people in Instagram. I get a lot of people reaching out to me, and they're all saying, "Hey, yay, great, ding dong, the witch is dead, the witch is dead." Like what, the Wizard of Oz. Well, I can see where they're coming from, because it's very, it's very easy to come to, if you just glance at stuff and don't dig into it, you could think that, well, okay, awesome, unconstitutional. Whew, we're out of the woods, right? Well, no. Here's the key takeaway, okay? That decision stops the federal government from enforcing the Corporate Transparency Act only against the plaintiffs of that lawsuit. It does not stop them from coming after us, okay? Now, some of you don't know this, but there's some states out there like New York that they have enacted their own version of the Corporate Transparency Act for their state. Okay, so they're not affected either. All right, and here's the important thing too: FinCEN has announced that they did not extend the judgment as a whole. I mean, their website's still up, it's online, it's operational, and they're working, right? So understand that, and remember, of course, they're going to appeal. They've already hinted around that they're definitely going to appeal this. And what happens? What they're going to do when they appeal is they're going to request a stay of enforcement of this decision until the appeal process works out. So let's look at the timeline here and just show you how long this is going to take. The original filing was on November 22nd, 2022. We didn't get the judge's ruling in district court until March 1st of 2024. That's a pretty hefty thing. Now, it's gonna when FinCEN appeals, it's gonna go to the appellate court, and they're gonna decide. But these things, if you Google this, you can see that these appeals processes, when you move up the ladder for the next level, you're talking about 16 months to 2 years before you get to the next level for the next decision to be made. And of course, I think regardless of how this works out, whether it's the unconstitutional ruling is thrown out, or if it's supported by the appellate court, the feds are going to go, both sides are going to appeal, because they want to get this to the Supreme Court to get a final decision. So if we're looking at 16 months to 2 years per appeal process, I mean, we could be looking at 3 to 5 years before we get an ultimate decision about whether this is constitutional or not. In the meantime, because FinCEN is going to get that stay in the courts, the next 3 to 5 years, we're all going to have to unfortunately, continue to deal with this horrible law. So think about this. How much damage can you incur with you and your business while this appeals process runs through? 3 to 5 years. I mean, it's immense about what could happen, right? So in my advice as an unlicensed person, of course, full disclosure, right? But I have a corporation. I'm in the process of shutting it down, right? I've decided that no matter what happens, I'm moving myself away from any kind of contact with the Corporate Transparency Act. But let's say that eventually that the Supreme Court's going to rule and rule, have it or rule that it's unconstitutional. We don't have to worry about that anymore. We still need to avoid LLCs and corporations like the plague. Okay. So those of you who've been watching my videos and on social media, on YouTube, and even spoken with me on the phone, you know that I have been harping on and on and on about the biggest danger, in my opinion, that I see happening in people's real lives here. And plus all the research I've done, it comes from the banks and financial institutions, right? Because they file suspicious activity reports. Banks are freezing accounts, they are closing accounts. I mean, my gosh, they had 3.6 million SAR reports filed in 2023, and they're going up every time. I mean, there's a statistic that actually blew me away. Did you know that from 2020 to 2023, the there was an increase of 46% in the suspicious activity reports that were filed by financial institutions? Why is that? Well, first of all, you understand that the FinCEN and the feds have been working towards this law for quite a while. I mean, they first started trying to get this going in 2017. So it's not like this hasn't been on their radar. They've been trying to put this together. And that they have been using banks and financial institutions as their eyes and ears. And so FinCEN's been using a carrot stick method with these financial institutions. They're putting major pressure on them to be their eyes and ears for what they believe is the hub, the center of financial of fraud, money laundering, terrorism funding, tax evasion. They really believe that smaller corporations, LLCs especially, are where all this illegal activity is coming from. So they want the banks to be able to monitor them, and so they're putting pressure on them. That's the stick part of it. They're gonna be whacking on them to make sure they do that. But they also give a very nice carrot. Financial institutions get 30 to 35% of the funds that they freeze if there's a conviction. Okay, so now what's different was, and listen, I got my mortgage broker's license way back in 2001, I believe it was, if not earlier, and I can tell you that we went over the Bank Secrecy Act and suspicious activity reports, and most of the time when you file those things, or when a bank filed it didn't really get anywhere, right? Nothing really happened. But the last 2 or 3 years, they've gone nuclear, and banks are encouraged to freeze and or close accounts immediately. And this is not changing regardless of what happens to the Corporate Transparency Act. It's going to continue to happen. I've said these examples before, but they're so powerful, right? Day trader, housewife, she learned how to day trade. It was kind of like just to get a side hustle. Turns out she was gifted, became a savant, made over $1 million, and boy, she got the financial institution doesn't believe, apparently, that housewives can get good at something like day trading, doing futures. And so then what they do, they decided, well, it must be illegal, it's suspicious, so they're going to shut it down. Over a year now has gone by, almost 2 years actually, and hasn't got hide nor hair of that money, probably never will, right? That happened before the Corporate Transparency Act was started being enforced in January 1st of this year, 2024, right? I've got two e-commerce people now who've reached out to me in the last week and a half. One in Chicago, they got about $400,000 SAR'd and frozen in Chicago. One guy reached out to me just this last week here, and said that he and his partner started a e-commerce business up, and they started doing really well. They made like $600,000 in 2 or 3 months. Boom, they got SAR'd and frozen. So, and then you're talking about, it's not just those types of numbers either, right? I have a very, very dear friend and mentor for me, who's really helped me in get better about talking about my business, about making my offers, and so on and so forth. And she teaches that corporately. I mean, she's a multi-millionaire, so the kind of people that are attracted to her, and who she coaches. She had one that had this great idea for a product, and he built a great sales funnel. She helped him, coached him, all this kind of stuff, and he made $20 million in less than a year. Boom. Because he didn't have any previous didn't have any previous success, just blew up. Well, that's got to be suspicious, right? So SARD, right? So I can't tell you how many people every week reach out to me and tell me they've gotten SARD and they've got their money, their accounts have been frozen. They don't know what to do. They don't have any money, right? So because I talk about this a lot, I get a lot of people coming out to me and or reaching out to me and asking me what I can do. So I'm telling you, look, this is anecdotal. I can't say I'm not going to be like a professor and cite, everything in my bibliography and footnotes and all that kind of stuff. I'm just telling you that I have a lot of people come reaching out to me. I've got a pretty big following, and this is happening so much more than you think. It's not getting a lot of press. But my point is that the feds are going to continue focusing on corporations and LLCs, and especially LLCs, no matter what happens with the Corporate Transparency Act being constitutional or unconstitutional. Okay, because the current attitude right now is that LLCs, especially, but mostly small business, that they are a haven for money laundering, terrorism funding, and tax fraud. Okay. And they got billions and billions of dollars in funding, FinCEN and IRS, after the Inflation Reduction Act was passed in 2022. And they are going aggressively after tax cheats. And they don't give a what about the collateral damage that's going to happen. We're already seeing that. So, I'm a real big fan of the series Justified, about this marshal, in Kentucky, and it's a great. I highly recommend if you haven't seen it. It's great. Binge it. It's awesome. But anyway, there's this one scene that always comes to mind where this one U.S. Marshal, Raylan, he was accused of murdering his ex-wife's husband, and he was being framed, and it was all circumstantial. And he's sitting there in the office of the chief marshal, the chief deputy marshal, and he's saying that the local police, the homicide detectives, he says they're going to go after the deer in their sights, in their rifle scope, right? Well, and so my point is that LLCs and smaller businesses are always going to be in the rifle scope of the feds now. They've made a shift. So even if there's nothing to do with the Corporate Transparency Act, you need to avoid that federal focus. And the best way to do that is not use corporations or LLCs anymore. Use an exempt entity from now on, which is what I've done. Okay. And the good news, that one day trader I was telling you about, the housewife turned savant and great, $1 million earner as a day trader. Well, we were able to get her an exempt entity and work her through this. And now she's trading. And, our solution basically saved their family's financial future. And we can offer that to people. That's what we're doing, because we want to give people the means to protect their livelihood, protect their things. Because the message that I'm getting from all of this is that the federal government has made a decision that entrepreneurs, that if they when they start making nice money, they're under suspicion because they shouldn't be that smart. Something had to happen that would be suspicious or odd, because people don't normally make that kind of money that quickly. So if you're that kind of person, and most of my clients are entrepreneurs, you're in their sights, whether this Corporate Transparency Act goes away or not. Okay. So, just to reiterate, okay, the Wicked Witch is not dead. Corporate Transparency Act is still there. It's going to be 3 to 5 years before it gets to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court rules. And the feds are going to get a stay during the appeals process. So we're stuck with this probably for the next 3 to 5 years, no matter what. So CTA is in our lives. Get used to it. Banks are going to continue with increasing amounts to submit suspicious activity reports, and they're going to keep freezing and closing accounts in greater numbers. You need a safe harbor for your business, for your personal investments, for your active business revenue. We can provide that for you. You just have to reach out to me. I'll get you information and we can show you how you can do that. In the meantime, we won a battle, but the war is not even close to being over. So stick with me and I'll show you the way to get around all this stuff.